Well, thank you, Troy, for that introduction. The WACBS board, which includes Micah D'Ambrosi, Jen Villadarga, Christine Terry, and myself, are all very excited to have you here and to help see our vision of a training conference finally come together in this gorgeous retreat center on this glorious weekend. Training conferences are very, very hard to put together. And none of this would have been possible without the planning and commitment and organization of two key people who are here. And the first is you, Troy. Thank you. First is you, Troy, and the other is Yvette. So before you walk away, I want to make sure we have a moment of gratitude for you and just give you a round of applause. We have a great program covering relational frame theory, acceptance and commitment therapy, functional analytics psychotherapy, compassion-focused therapy, and a blend of all of these contextual therapies. At the end of this conference, we're going to be taking the next steps together as a WACBS community and having a special event about that at the end. So let's kick off this keynote, and we'll get started. And I'm calling this the Impacting the World Through Behaviorism, the Ordinary Becomes Extraordinary. This is my next door neighbor. Her name is Betty. And here she is with my eldest daughter, Isabel. Betty likes to give her candy. So Isabel often says, "I want to go to Betty's house," which really means she wants a lollipop. This is Betty's orange cat. His name is Connor. Isabel likes to pet him. We have spent many hours together, just sitting on Betty's porch and chatting with her and her daughters and her grandchildren. Betty likes to go out to lunch with her friends, and she likes to find good deals at garage sales, which she calls going sailing. So, in many ways, Betty is just like any of your next door neighbors. Betty is ordinary. She's just like us. And in 1975, Betty did something extraordinary.
Defeat in the North to overtake the country. One brave American woman came to be known as the Angel of Saigon, and hundreds of grateful American families still call her that today.
I walked into the nursery and I saw babies in rusty cribs. The diapers were rags with no bedding. I couldn't go back to being the swinging single that I was. I had to help these children.
It was spring 1975. The fall of Saigon was imminent. Who would escape ahead of the fierce communist takeover? One American woman was desperate at least to save some children. Betty Tisdale had spent years raising funds and volunteering for the Onlock Orphanage, which had hundreds of orphans.
I knew I had to go over and bring those children back. I had no idea how to do it, what to do, where I was going to put them. I had to find planes, I had to find a place for them, I had to find parents for them.
At first, the South Vietnamese government banned children from leaving. Then, as the Viet Cong drew closer to Saigon, the South Vietnamese government relented, permitting children under the age of 10 to leave if they had birth certificates.
You know, babies you find them at the gates of the orphanage without papers, so we went and got blank birth certificates and filled them all in.
Where would she bring all these children once in the U.S.? Betty picked up the phone and called the Secretary of the Army.
He didn't return my call, so I called his mother. She said, I'll do the best I can.
The Defense Department ended up giving her a school building at Fort Benning, Georgia, as a temporary home for the kids. Betty also got the American Air Force to give her room on their planes. And so, the exodus of 219 orphans from Onlock began.
What future do you see for the children who are going out today?
The brightness of the future in America. They have everything at their fingertips. All they need to do is take it.
Here they are arriving, their first minutes in America. And over the next month, Betty found American families to adopt every single baby. Babies like Adam, Vicky, Elizabeth, and Dan.
She placed all 219 children within 30 days.
I think few people can say, what an impact one person has had in so many lives.
I mean, she's given us such a gift.
Her orphans became doctors, businessmen, writers, bankers, now raising families of their own.
She embraced all of us as we were her children. We were all her children.
And so we choose Betty Tisdale, who adopted 5 orphans of her own. She's 87 years old now and still traveling to orphanages.
Betty's actions in 1975 and her later work at orphanages around the world saved 600 lives. And I am sorry to say that Betty suffered a stroke last month. My family got to see her before she died peacefully at home. Just 5 weeks shy of her 93rd birthday. So for me, this conference is about the extraordinary impact that we make on our clients and on the people we serve in our work and in our daily lives. What can we learn from Betty's ordinary yet extraordinary life? Well, first, let's just say that Betty was not a psychologist. She had no mental health training, and I think that is the best part because it reminds us that we all existed before psychology ever came along. That we learned so much from people who just live psychological principles naturally without any special training. Or just simply, you can learn a lot from an older person. In my eyes, she embodied 4 behavioral principles that we're going to be focusing on during our workshops these next 2 days. So here's the journey ahead. First, what I call Betty's 4 principles of behaviorism. Second, I'm going to share how our presenters embody these principles. Third, I'll show science supporting them. And finally, we'll wrap up with a skill-building exercise. So first, she showed courage. Courage, from a functional analytic psychotherapy point of view, or FAP, is defined as risky actions done in the service of connecting with others. Betty told me how much she risked ridicule from her family and her friends and risked public shaming for her actions. Actions taken for the potential to have deep human connection with those 5 daughters and to save the other 214 lives. Now, our workshop presenters have a number of examples of courage in their own lives, and I thank them for letting me share them with you today. Let me start by highlighting one from Bob Kohlenberg, the co-creator of FAP therapy. He wrote, "Ever since I was a young boy, my dad wanted me to take over the family's plumbing and heating business. I was groomed to take over that business. So I felt very selfish and indulgent when I wanted to go to graduate school. One of the most anxiety-provoking talks I have ever had with my dad was when I told him that I did not want to take over his business. And with courage and fear in my heart, I said, I want to study science. I dream of the day that I will become a research psychologist." And when I said that, my dad looked at me and he said, "I know you're too good for this business. You should pursue your dreams." He was loving and compassionate. And whenever Bob remembers that story, it brings tears to his eyes. Mavis Tsai, co-creator of FAP Therapy, shared this about courage. I continue to take daily risks as FAP evolves. Here I'm inspired by Bren Brown's vulnerability prayer. Give me the courage to show up and to let myself be seen. And she added, I want to continually cultivate my abilities, not only to be more courageous, but to be more aware and loving, because we can only take others as far as we've gone ourselves. And we can make the most difference when we show up most fully. Now, science supports these stories which we carry in our hearts. So, this is a very scary looking slide. You can always count on our psychologist to come up with one of these PATH models. It's a study of 62 young adult male-female couples. It was done at Ohio State, looking at the link between being authentic, defined as expressing how much you care for others, and your overall relationship quality, defined as openness and intimacy, and your well-being. So I'll demystify this messy PATH model. It's simply that when you're authentic, your relationship functioning improves, and in turn, you have a better quality of your relationship, and that in turn influences your well-being. And this is true for males, and this is true for females. So, I don't know why they made it so complicated. But they did. So the take home. Courage improves your relationships and well-being. Betty showed it, our presenters showed it, and the science supports it. Principle 2. Betty showed compassion for others. Paul Gilbert, the creator of compassion-focused therapy, also known as CFT, you'll see we love acronyms, defines compassion this way. It's a basic kindness with deep awareness of the suffering of oneself and of others, coupled with a wish and effort to relieve it. Betty showed boundless kindness toward those children, casualties of war living in horrible conditions that we would not wish on any of our children. While the world was silent to their plight, she spoke up, and she said, "You matter to me." She was touched and she was moved by those children's suffering. Russell Coles, who will be presenting on CFT, shared this example of how he felt compassion toward prisoners he worked with recently. Russell wanted to try his CFT model for anger with men who were in prison. He said, I guess I could have started with a group of people at the university where I have a lot of respect. And I would have hedged my bets with a bunch of high-functioning adults. But if I was going to put out a book about a new way to work with people with anger, I wanted it to really work, to have been tested in the hottest of fires. As I had gotten to know these men at the prison, I found myself filled with compassion for them, seeing how the context of their lives had systematically placed many of them in a track almost designed to lead them to a life behind bars. I saw obstacles in the normal dynamics of prison life that seemed to hinder the rehabilitation rather than to help them. And I felt moved by the difficult lives these men had experienced in trying to live in a threat-filled prison environment. They were saddened by the shame. I was saddened by the shame that filled them as they reflected on how their lives had gone and inspired how hard they had worked in their therapy groups. And by the growing awareness that deep down, they wanted to be good men who made lives better for others and for themselves. They just needed some help to figure out how. And I have never seen a more committed and hardworking group of clients. And science shows the power of compassion. Here's a study by Barbara Fredrickson at Chapel Hill, North Carolina. She and her colleagues randomized 139 adults to either get a loving kindness meditation or a waiting list. Loving kindness meditation teaches people how to be compassionate, loving, warm, and caring toward others, to loved ones, to strangers, and eventually to all living beings. What they found is that people who were assigned to the loving kindness meditation route experienced more positive feelings such as joy and awe and amusement and love compared to those in the control group. And this was true over the course of the 8 weeks of the trial. And she also found, with another super complicated structural equation model, that increases in these positive emotions were related to what she called changes in resources, which is simply lower physical illness and higher sleep quality, and that in turn led to greater life satisfaction. So the take home is that compassion improves health and life satisfaction. Principle 3, Betty did what works. She showed behavioral flexibility, where she responded to the present moment based on what was happening in the context. She did what works. When one thing doesn't work, you try something new rather than just running in circles. When the Secretary of the Army would not return her phone call, she changed course and she called his mother. And when she needed birth certificates to get the children out of Vietnam, she wrote them herself. For Chris McCurry, who will be presenting on ACT for children and teens, becoming a father has been an ongoing exercise in behavioral flexibility. He has had to learn how to instill values to his son when he wasn't open to hearing about them. His life was temporarily turned upside down when his son came down with chickenpox and his wife was out of town. And Chris had to see past his own social anxiety when meeting with teachers and coaches and scout leaders and parents at school. He did what worked in this situation. Patty Robinson, Kirk Strassel will be co-presenting on delivering ACT in a brief model. Together, they have provided this description of how they've shown flexibility in their work in the primary care setting. They have been bringing ACT into primary care, and they've had to learn by trial and error how to make it work for a huge variety of problems, conduct it briefly, and condense it down to its essential elements. They write about and they live in a world where the average clinician is forced to do more with less. So they appreciate how everyone has to be flexible to make therapy work for their clients. Let's look at the evidence for flexibility. Well, the data show that flexibly adapting your goals and in combination with tenacity improves well-being. Here's a study by Rebecca Kelly and colleagues at King's College in London. She followed 5,700 people aged 55 for 10 years. And at baseline, she looked at their tendency to flexibly adjust their goals, and 10 years later looked at their level of depression, hostility, and physical health with an 84% data follow-up rate. For 10 years, that's really good. At the 10-year follow-up, she found that people who reported high levels of flexibility at baseline had lower depression overall, they had lower hostility, and they had lower physical illness than the people who had low flexibility at baseline. And this effect, which is an interaction here, shows that this effect is more powerful if you're highly tenacious at pursuing your goals. So there's a synergistic effect about being flexible and tenacious. The take home, doing what works improves your health. Principle 4, Betty lived her values. Values are what your life is about. They're what you deeply care about and what you stand for. Now, in the 1960s and early 70s, Betty was the secretary for U.S. Senator Jacob Javits of New York. He was a champion of civil rights and international development. She traveled the world meeting foreign leaders and heads of state. Her life was rich and exciting, but she felt something was missing, a core value unfulfilled. So Betty started a charity called Halo, Helping and Loving Orphans. She loved those children in Vietnam. She saw them, and she felt compelled to help them. That love led her all the way to orphanages in Vietnam, in Mexico, in Colombia, in Afghanistan, in Haiti, in Tibet. Adopting those 5 girls activated her sense of purpose and meaning in life. She loved my Isabel like her own granddaughter. And she loved until she died. Let me tell you about Kelly Kerner. We'll be presenting on using behavioral principles to work with difficult clients. Her mission statement includes the phrase, "True gold does not fear fire." She said, "I have pursued a path as a social entrepreneur, someone who draws on business techniques to find innovative solutions. In my case, the social problem has been how to remedy the science-practice gap so that anyone, anywhere can access evidence-based mental health care. This has involved jumping in the fire over and over. Returning to graduate school, finishing her PhD with no business training, returning to graduate school to retool in user-centered design, taking big financial risks to launch a software startup. On March 1, her team launched Willow, a software system that helps therapists learn, use, and monitor patients' responses to evidence-based therapies. Super major milestones accomplished from 8 years of trusting the gold of my sincere intention to be of use and need not fear fire. Let me tell you about Jennifer Villatte, who will be presenting on changing cognitions in psychotherapy, along with her colleague, Mathieu Villatte. To express her values, she shared this verse from a song called Helplessness Blues. I was raised up believing I was somehow unique, like a snowflake distinct among snowflakes. Unique in each way you can see. And now, after some thinking, I'd say I'd rather be a functioning cog in some great machinery, serving something beyond me. Jennifer said, I value service. For me, this value is summed up in these lyrics. Training in contextual behavioral interventions is one of my favorite forms of service. I think it makes the world better, and I think it makes me a better person. I find inspiration and courage in keeping my cog turning in the service of a worldwide initiative that is bigger and better than any of us. And I am also deeply uncomfortable by the attention that I receive because I am a trainer. It reminds me that I am also a snowflake. I worry that my uniqueness will separate me from the people and the purpose that I serve, and that I may not be able to resist the lure of being special. So forgive me, I made your picture a little bit bigger. Our presenter, Mathieu Villatte, shared this story of caring for someone even when he felt the fear of being judged. He wrote, in the past year, I sent an email to a colleague who lost someone important. I had already done so when that person died, but the more challenging move for me was when I sent the second email a few months later to check in. I was worried this could be received as intrusive, or I wouldn't express my sympathy appropriately. I was also worried that this person just might not respond and would be left without knowing if I had done something helpful or if I had done something intrusive. I still did it after remembering my own experience in these kinds of circumstances. It's often the sympathy expressed by people who are not the closest to you that can be the most touching. If that sympathy is expressed with authenticity. So I simply sent an email asking how this person was doing, acknowledging that grieving is not a linear process, and I was there. to help in any way. When I clicked the send button, I knew I was doing something for that person, despite my fear of judgment, despite my fear that I might not even know what impact that sending the email had had. And I just had a strong sense that it was right. And now, the effectiveness that values matter. Here's a well-designed study of 1,000 people in the Chicago area. They were 80 years old at baseline, and they completed a standardized self-report measure of one's purpose in life. They had 7 annual clinical evaluations, including their medical history, a complete neurological exam, and cognitive testing. What they found was that greater purpose in life predicted a 50% lower risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. That's the group with a high purpose in life score. That's their odds of developing Alzheimer's disease. That's pretty amazing. Well, I'll tell you that Betty's mind was sharp as a razor until the very end. And let me add that this result that these researchers found was the same regardless of how much money you made, how much education you had, even if you were depressed or anxious or lacked social support or had chronic conditions. That is a powerful result. The take home, living your values keeps you sharp and engaged. So, in the spirit of building our WACBS community, I'm inviting you now to do something ordinary and at the same time extraordinary. Turn to the person sitting next to you. It could be to your left or to your right. And try to pick someone you don't know. Tell that person how your life is ordinary. Then tell that person about something you did that was extraordinary. Say how you showed courage or compassion or flexibility or acted on your values. And then notice the different reactions you're having between being asked about the ordinary versus about the extraordinary. And notice the story that maybe you're not quite ready to share, which is okay. And just notice the feelings that that brings up. I'll ask one person to be the listener and the other person to be the speaker. The listener's job is just to listen and to notice the reactions you're having in hearing the story. And I'll tell you when to switch places. We'll spend about 4 or 5 minutes for each person, and then we'll debrief. Let's get started. So, in closing, I'd like to share with you a poem that Mavis Tsai sent me. It's by William Martin in the Parents' Tao Te Ching, Ancient Advice for Modern Parents. Do not ask your children to strive for extraordinary lives. Such striving may seem admirable, but it is the way of foolishness. Help them understand to find the wonder and the marvel of an ordinary life. Show them the joy of tasting tomatoes, apples, and pears. Show them how to cry when pets and people die. Show them the infinite pleasure in the touch of a hand, and make the ordinary come alive for them. The extraordinary will take care of itself. Betty's life and our own lives are a reminder that living fully in the ordinary with courage, compassion, flexibility, and by our own values, we will discover the extraordinary. Thank you, everyone, for sharing your stories.